boys and girls. It's Grandma Shaw. So, I have loved reading you stories for over 75 days. And I just loved reading to my friends in Spokane and in Joyce and in Beaver and in Oregon and in California and in Idaho. I have friends in so many places and lots of friends right here in Forks. Boys and girls, this is my last story. So I am going to read a story called The Good Old Days. Leah and Andy were two little kittens, and they were happy living in the city with their family. But they loved to visit their grandparents in the mountains, especially in the summer. This time, they were going to stay a whole week by themselves. So everyone piled in the car, and Mommy and Daddy sat up front. Leah and Andy bounced up and down on the back seat. They held up their favorite toys, Timmy Tabby and Mr. Whiskers, and they made them wave goodbye to the neighborhood. "Children, children," cried their mother, "put on your seat belts and settle down. We have a long ride ahead." Do you go to your grandma's house? Is it a long ways or a short ways? Leah sat Tiny Tabby on her lap and began to tell her about the mountains. Grandma and Grandpa have a yard that's bigger than a park. And, Andy told Mr. Whiskers, we can go outside anytime we want to, by ourselves. If we want a snack, we can pick berries off the bushes and we don't even have to go to the store. At night, Grandma tells us stories about the good old days, Andy said, and when Grandma and Grandpa used to have fun all the time. Leah and Andy decided to count passing trucks, and it wasn't long before they fell asleep. The car was pulling into their grandparents' house when they woke up. Grandma and Grandpa greeted them with big hugs and kisses. Then they all had lunch before Mommy and Daddy drove home to the city. No sooner had the children waved goodbye to their parents when they realized they had forgotten Tabby and Mr. Whiskers in the back seat of the car. "But I can't sleep without Mr. Whiskers," cried Andy. "I can't sleep without Tiny Tabby," cried Leah. "In the good old days," Grandpa said with a wink at Grandma, "if we needed a toy, I'd just sit down and make up from scraps. But little one's bedtime is a long way off, so for now, how would you like to pick some mooseberries with me? They grow on the island in the lake. I hope you won't mind a little boat ride." "Hooray!" exclaimed the kittens. "Let's go." Grandpa rowed them across the lake to a small island that was covered with blueberry bushes. "Why do you call the blueberries mooseberries, Grandpa?" asked Leah as she popped a blueberry into her mouth. "Well, back in the good old days," began Grandpa, "I looked up from my daddy's boat to see a moose with a big blue smile gazing at me on the island. We rowed over to investigate, and we got big blue smiles too." "Do I have one?" asked Andy. Me, do I have one?" exclaimed Leah. Grandpa chuckled and showed them both big blue smiles reflected in the shiny berry pail. The kittens took turns helping Grandpa row the boat back to shore, and when they were close to home, the kittens ran ahead excitedly to show Grandma how many berries they had picked, while Grandpa stayed behind to do some work in his workshop. "Wonderful, wonderful," Grandma sang. "We have enough berries to make a cobbler from our secret family recipe. Who wants to help?" "We do!" exclaimed the kittens. Andy mixed the flour, baking powder, sugar, and salt, and Leah added the butter and the milk. "In the good old days, we always had milk fresh from our cow. I used to milk her every morning," said Grandma. All by yourself? Andy asked. Just me and the cow, joked Grandma. Now for the secret ingredient. Do you know what it is? Mooseberries, yelled Leah and Andy as Grandma poured the blueberries into the baking pan. Leah and Andy giggled as they plopped the thick dough on top of the blueberries. Grandma put the pan into the oven. I haven't made a mooseberry cobbler in ages, Grandma said with a sigh. This reminds me of the good old days. Very quietly, Leah asked Andy, does that mean that today is a good old day too? Andy didn't know. Later, after dinner, they all sat on the porch and they ate delicious cobbler. Everyone had 2 helpings. Grandpa said, I remember nights like this when I was young. The whole family would bring out instruments and we'd sing and play our favorite tunes. Those were the good old days. Soon it was time to go to bed. Grandpa excused himself to do some chores while Grandma ran a bath for the kittens. After the bath, Leah said, how can I go to bed without Tiny Tabby? Well, I don't want to go to sleep without Mr. Whiskers, Andy said sadly. Well, maybe a story would help, said Grandma as she tucked them in. Will you tell us a story about the good old days? Begged the kittens. Oh, you don't want to hear any more about that, said Grandma. That was a long, long time ago. Everything was different. I bet you didn't even have to go to school then, said Andy. Oh, heavens, yes, said Grandma. Papa hitched up a little red goat cart and dropped me off every day. Wow, that sure beats a school bus, said Andy. And at school, Grandma continued, all the grades sat in one room. We learned how to read and write and how to chase mice, of course, but my favorite subject was fishing. I got straight A's. They don't even teach fishing at our school, said Leah with a frown. Gee, Grandma, I wish we lived back then, declared Andy. Was today a good old day? Leah asked. Oh, my darlings, a day spent with my grandchildren is a much better than a good old day. It's a good new day, exclaimed Grandma. Leah and Andy smiled. Just then, Grandpa came to say goodnight. Look what I have, he said, and he held out 2 old-fashioned toys. One looked like a little tiny tabby, and the other one looked like Mr. Whiskers. Grandpa made those today just for you, said Grandma. Just like that, began Grandpa. Good new days, finished Leah and Andy. Everyone had a good laugh, and Grandpa gave them their new toys. Leah said sleepily, I'm just going to pretend this one is Tiny Tabby's grandma. And this one can be Mr. Whiskers' grandpa, Andy said with a yawn. Tomorrow will be another good new day, said Grandma softly. Then she and Grandpa kissed the kittens, turned out the light, and said good night. The end. Well, one day, boys and girls, you are going to say, hey, remember the good old days back when we got to stay home and do school with our mom or our grandma or our dad? Those were the good old days. So, boys and girls, I hope you have a good new day today. And I hope that the next time you see me, it's in person and I get to give you a hug. But for now, bye from Grandma Shaw. Thanks for listening, boys and girls.